100X Club. This is Matthew, and this is the entire episode in 15 seconds. We are back with another look at where Web3 gaming just might take place. This time, we are talking with an L2 whose unique approach is bringing Web2 games all the way over into Web3 with an entirely different way to monetize than most gaming chains. For gamers, for games, but still for crypto. This is Uprising on the 100X podcast. Welcome, gentlemen. Do you want to introduce yourselves? What Uprising is, who you are, what you're building and crafting?
Yeah, I guess I'll kick it off. So I'm Eric Vanderwall. I am been in the space for a little while. Myself, a developer for 25 years, came in through the traditional space for about a decade and got pretty burned out and said, what does every little boy want to do with their lives? Make video games, and let's do it. Changed my career and started making games. Figured out very quickly it's hard to make money as an indie game developer. I think more and more people know that today than they did back then. I released a couple of indie titles in Asia where I was living at the time, and later went into essentially picks and shovels and worked on game tool development side of things. So worked with a company called Huton Games, but they make something called Playmaker, which is a visual scripting solution for Unity. It's the most popular third-party tool out there. It was used for games like Hearthstone, for example, was built on top of it. So did that later into Silicon Valley in VR, had a great time, and that was sort of my last stop before crypto. So yeah, dipped my toes on the gaming side professionally, but not as much as some of the other people on the team.
Before we dig into everything this episode has to offer, we want to highlight the awesome partners who sponsor this podcast and make it possible for us to work full-time on 100X. They're legends, and we appreciate them for supporting us. Let me tell you about our friends at games.gg. And when I say friends, I really do mean that they are friends of 100X. Their CEO, Omar, was one of my first introductions to Web3 gaming, and we're OG holders of their Gamers Lobby collection. We love these guys. They're essentially the super app of Web3 gaming. One of the cool things they've cooked up is a gaming quest system. You complete free quests for cool games, anything from retweeting a post to beating a mission in a new game, and then you get rewards, tokens, skins, whitelist access, all kinds of things. Currently, they have active quests for Boss Fighters, Space Mavericks, in the Game Awards 2024. Go slam those quests for free at games.gg right now.
Ended up joining a company named Nervos, which is a proof of work UTXO L1 blockchain, hardcore engineering. While I was the director of developer relations there, I met Ryan, and Ryan, along with the rest of the team, we spun up an L2 that was EVM compatible on top of the UTXO chain. So we were the first EVM L2 on top of the UTXO. Lots of big engineering challenges there, lots of product market fit challenges there. We were also the first optimistic rollup in production that was not a clone of Optimism at that time. So we had a pretty good run there for about a year, and we were completely funded by the L1. However, when it sort of came to say, okay, we need to fundraise or do a token or do whatever we need to do, really that's when FTX happened. And at that point, everyone's like, yeah, we're just going to wait and
really
see
fun,
where
yeah.
things go.
So, really fun. Good time.
I love being in crypto.
Good time.
Yeah.
We love that. So unfortunately, that was sort of the end of the team there, the end of the line for that project. It was reabsorbed by the L1. So it's still ongoing, called Godwoken, but it's pretty much in, I would say, maintenance mode at this point. From there, I joined Mantle. I was the head of product at Mantle as it went from BitDAO to being Mantle. So not a lot of people on the team there had launched L2s at that point. So I was brought in to run the largest team there, which was the product team. Worked very closely with the engineering team to launch that. So once Mantle was up and running to basically where it is today, I joined Oasis. So I am the VP of ecosystem at Oasis currently. So yeah, Oasis, I think, is starting to gain somewhat of a reputation here. They're just about a year and a half mainnet. But we primarily work with like Ubisoft and Bandai Namco, Square Enix, who am I missing? Sega, among many others.
SoftBank,
SBI, Rakuten. Yeah, quite a few big names on that side. So actually Oasis itself, as a chain, has 10 L2s currently, either announced or in production. So some of them run more like app chains, which is one or two games, such as Last Memories recently came out. So they are number one in Japan on the iOS store with us. So big success from those guys. And then other ones are basically have like full ecosystems, basically. So for the whole gamut. While I was at Oasis, we just saw a lot of opportunity for our own L2, myself and Ryan, about how we wanted to do things and do things a little bit differently. And at this point, this would be my third L2 that I essentially launched in my career. So if you hate L2s, you're welcome. Hello, I've launched a bunch of them.
You're the reason there's so many L2s.
I'm one of the reasons why there's a bunch of L2s. But yeah, really, it's less about the technology at this point. I think that's becoming more and more commoditized, and we can talk about that. But primarily about your approach, the kind of products you're building, the people you're working with, the value props that you bring, really. So yeah, that's really how we got to all the way from Nervos, where myself and Ryan work together, to where we are today. So
I will try to condense mine a little bit.
Yeah, you have
more
7
detail
seconds.
7 seconds. Music executive, gaming executive, now in blockchain. That's my 7-second wrap up. Yeah, I've been a entertainment executive for almost 25 years now. Started off in the music business. Did band management. Had 13 clients that were on my roster. Ended up getting divorced, and in the process of that, decided the best thing that we could do for the artist was to shut the thing down and let them buy out their contract. So we had a clause in the contract that approved buyout for $1. So that happened. I came back here to where I live now, and kind of always been in gaming. I worked at what was now GameStop, Babbage's, back in high school, and so been a gamer. My very first entrepreneurial experience was actually starting a BBS back in the day, a Try BBS. So I ran a pretty successful Try BBS. I told my dad the story about my dad at 12, 13 years old. He came. I said, "Dad, I need a bank account." He's like, "Why?" And I had like $3,000 in checks that people had written to me to have access to my Try BBS game BBS, which was called the Round Table. Anyway, came back here, started Forthright Entertainment back in 2007. Quickly moved into the mobile space as the Apple App Store was starting out, and so did apps quickly. I did 2 apps, and then moved right into gaming. Really enjoyed that space. It was one of the very first early adopters of licensing source code. Did very well in that process. Scaled into PC gaming, PC publishing, and then console development and publishing. And so I've launched over 90 titles in my career across all platforms. So still the chairman at Forthright, left the full-time position to co-found Uprising here with Eric. Like Eric said, we met back in the day when he was doing at Nervos and Godwoken. I also was part of a failed startup of a gaming platform called Alloy. So been around for a little bit in the space. Really enjoy I think the merger of blockchain technology and gaming. I just think there's so many layers of opportunity there. So
Agreed.
Yeah, that's a quick
I'm so
about.
bullish on that merger. Kearney, introduce yourself, even though I just said your name.
Yeah, so I'm the head of community at Uprising, also the intern that I report to our 2 founders up here. But I've been in crypto for 7 years now. Been kind of in the trenches for some time, and that's kind of like what I've kind of been able to provide for Eric and Ryan here. Been in Web3 gaming for, I want to say, about like officially like a year and a half, but like really in the past 9 months have been like fully full-time Web3 gaming. I host a lot of spaces. I kind of initially started out doing Discord AMAs with founders in 2017. Then the NFT bull run happened. I was hosting some daily spaces where we kind of that's when spaces first started blowing up. I used to host spaces with BitGod, and if you know Bones, he's heavily involved in the Sui ecosystem. So those 2 guys we kind of started out all together, and now we're slowly working on our own ecosystems, which is pretty cool. And then I used to host 6-hour spaces with DGens. If anyone remembers, I used to do mega spaces every Wednesday night. So I've been deeply in the trenches. I also host my own weekly spaces show called the Weekly Wrap Up on Fridays, and we bring on some Web3 gaming KOLs and games and such as. But again, in the trenches, and really here to build up the community at Uprising.
Nice, man. Your story is similar to ours. In the
That's
trenches of
actually-
crypto a long time before being in
That's
the
For the
actually how we
record, he's
met.
not the intern. That is the joke.
Yeah, that's the joke. That's
Some
how
people
we
think
met. I know. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's how we actually met. I was on Bennett's Spaces on the weekly wrap up, and he just did, it was an amazing job, brought in just, top notch guests. And so I was like, dude, you want a job? And he's like, hell yeah, let's do it. So if you're out there, you're doing spaces, you're working in the community, and you're looking to work full time somewhere, definitely advertise yourself and let people know that you're available. Bennett did not, but I basically reached out anyways and took a chance, and thankfully he said yes. Bennett has been an absolutely indispensable part of the team. So
I'd say foundational piece.
Yeah, for sure.
Easy.
Yeah.
Lockdown. We got 3 legends with us. I'm excited. I really want to get into this piece of the conversation. And that is, look, I told you guys off camera that we have had some of the other major, whether it was layer 1s or layer 2s, or some of them just call themselves platforms, places where Web3 games are going to take place or be supported by or be published by. This is like the back end that is making Web3 gaming happen. And I want to know what makes you guys unique. Why does Uprising need to exist if Chain 1, 2, and 3 exist? What is it that you guys are doing that maybe someone else isn't doing yet?
Yeah, I think
or doing well.
I think there's a couple of pieces to that. So I don't think it's any one thing, and I think that's the way of life, right? It's never one defining factor in something. It's always multiple pieces supporting each other that solidifies. I think maybe I'll start off with the team, because I think that's a good place. Again, I probably say this a lot, but that it helps to contextualize things where we are. So obviously I've introduced myself, Ryan's introduced himself, Bennett has as well. You understand sort of our backgrounds in Web3. We're not new. We've been here for a while. We're not new in gaming. We've been there for a while. I'll just call it a couple other people on the team. So our philosophy overall is small team, big network. As I mentioned, I came from a background in Mantle before this. It's a fairly large team, and it runs a very specific way. I'd give a shout out to Nervos, who I also mentioned, and they also have a small team, big network philosophy. And so that's really where we picked it up. And so the team is very concentrated in that sense. So our head of product is a guy named Mike Wallace. So he is the director of product for live ops for Sony PlayStation. So he just released Helldivers 2 with the team there. He's been there for about a year and a half, maybe, I think. Previous to that, he was the director of product and oversaw live ops for Activision Blizzard. So he did live ops for Battle.net, which is Diablo 4 and many other games. So I believe he was the director and the producer for EVE Online. He's done other titles like Lord of the Rings, NBA Jam, Sonic the Hedgehog games, sort of the whole gamut. So
Tomb Raider,
yeah. Another call out would certainly be June. He's Dr. June. He's a PhD from Stanford in economics. He does game economics and data analytics. He also contracts out to the Sandbox, so he does that sort of work for other projects as well. Maybe one last person would be Nate. Nate's on our team, so he's comes from Coinbase. He was the first hire into GameStop's Web3 division. RIP to those guys. He actually left before that went down the drain and worked with us at Godwilkin. And so again, the team has a lot of experience in this side, and so I think it's given us the ability to see what works and what doesn't work. We see a lot of people coming in who have not been in the space that long, or think, hey, I worked at XYZ AAA company, so I know how this is going to work, right? And so for us, I think having a blended team between those who have been in blockchain for long enough to know how things work, as well as those who have been in the gaming space everywhere from the indie side to the AAA, because it's not... Ryan is my co-founder for a very specific reason, that he has a ton of experience. And other than we get along well and we're friends and these sort of things, he has a lot of experience. The only reason Ryan is here is because he has published 90 titles. Ryan can pick winners. And when it comes to being a chain, a publisher, whatever you want to call it, a lot of what our job is picking winners, because it's hard to know how things are going to turn out down the line, right? And so having almost 2 decades of experience of doing that is something that I personally cannot do. And there's no one else on the team, I think, that can do what he does in that sense. So just setting up the team itself, I think bringing our experience is one thing that really does set us apart from doing it. I think the other thing to call out here is we often see, and I'm not trying to drag other teams down, but we'll see people like, oh, I worked at this AAA company. I'm bringing my experience, and they were like a VFX artist, but they're coming in as like the head product or something, right? Like it's not transferable experience. There's a name brand there, or like I was
it's like Amazon. Built by the team that created PlayStation, and it is an actual intern from 1997.
And he's like a QA tester or something like that. Which no shade to that guy. If he's coming in to do QA testing or lead QA testing, that makes sense. But a lot of it is there's a lot of smoke and mirrors there, I think. So
well, actually, if I can touch on this too, one of our core philosophies is that we actually want to be a cash flow positive business. Which, if you actually talk to pretty much any chain, that is not the philosophy.
There's almost no. I mean, to say that a chain is cash flow positive and crypto is even outside of gaming. That's the 0.001%.
Yeah, and so we believe that being an actual functional business, it affects our decision-making process in a way that makes us not use or use maybe a harsh word or abuse the community, but take for granted the community or make decisions that there's not a risk for us. We can just, we'll sell some more tokens, we'll go get another raise. We want to be cash flow positive. And so that decision process affects how we view and approach things. So that's what I add that point in there, Eric.
Well, on that, I'm curious, while you're mentioning that, I don't know the way that your guys' tokens or anything works yet with Uprising. Are you guys like profitable right now at Uprising? Or is that projected to be profitable?
It's projected to be profitable. We're not there yet because we're just launching up. I think so. I'm not sure. A lot of people really, I think, maybe don't understand how blockchains are profitable outside of VCs. And let me touch upon that because we again also are taking almost the reverse direction here. So the first off is we're a permission chain. So similar to Axes or Gala or these types of approaches, we want to make sure that we curate what's coming into the chain and that basically everything has our stamp of approval and a level of quality control that comes through. Of course, we don't control all the teams. They're still going to make their own mistakes or have their own wins. But we want sort of that level of control. Additionally,
there is like a lock and key to let them in the door.
Well, we don't want teams that are going to rug pull and or do things that are going to hurt the community to the best that we can. So.
I mean, we had Ronan on a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I think our listeners are probably familiar with that concept.
Exactly. Every team that comes in is KYC'd, and it really reduces the chance of rug pull in general, right? So as we work with companies like Sega, so Sega's launching on another L2 on Oasis. At this, I don't want to speak for them, but generally speaking, they can't launch on Arbitrum or Optimism for now, at least, because they just can't send like an 80-year-old grandmother who's playing a card trading game on their phone to get like rugged, where they're just playing like a Sega game. There has to be some level of security for some of the bigger companies out there. So I think the other part, which I was really trying to get at, is we are also 100% gasless. We have zero gas fee transactions whatsoever. And for us, this is part of our core philosophy. We still have to pay gas down to the L1. We do that. We eat that cost. And we're happy to do that because we believe so much in what we're doing. And other chains in general are saying, okay, like our gas fees are getting cheaper. It used to be $1. It's 50 cents. It's 20 cents. For us, it doesn't matter, right? In the sense of it doesn't matter how cheap it is if you have to bridge over just to try a game. It doesn't matter how cheap it is if you have to go to a centralized exchange to buy like $2 worth of tokens. You've lost the vast majority of gamers at that point, right? Maybe Web3 people, but we need to push out of that bubble. And we can circle back to that in a minute. But essentially being 100% gas-free does bring up new questions. So just to throw a little alpha for some people who don't know, I think you guys probably do, but most blockchains make money by adding a tax on top of what they pay to Ethereum. So say, for example, Mantle, Arbitrum, OP, whatever it is, right? So if they pay $1 down to Ethereum in settlement fees, they're adding 20% on top of that. They take that goes into their kitty, and then that's how they do it. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Like, that's their approach. That's how their business is built, and it's necessary for certain L2s, certainly. And and we've worked with all of those people. But for us, for gaming, that's just not a viable option for most people. So again, we can't just rely on sort of gas taxing people to death and our players as a source of revenue. So meaning we need to really focus on other things, such as having quality games that can be cash positive and sustainable over a long period of time, instead of like a pump and dump as we eat those gas fees and then VC investment and whatever else.
Yeah, it goes back to this idea of in any, all the data shows whenever you have a break point in signing in, creating an account, everything you do, there's a fall off in people experiencing that. And so from a Web 2 player perspective specifically, very common. And Eric touched on this, but to be really frank, there's not really a massive growing Web 3 community. It's kind of the same groups, and we're not really funneling new people in. And so I'll use the example of, I think the user journey needs to be that they don't even know they're just doing something. They don't need to know it's Web 3 or Web 2. No one sits there and says when they're playing Call of Duty, is this AWS or Azure servers? What's the infrastructure here? No one cares. Does my game work? Can I have fun? Is it working? And that's where we need to be from a technology stack point for the consumer perspective. Is the more simplified we can make that user journey, the more users we will keep and retain into the space.
So for us, that means every game that comes out is social sign-in. That you can sign in with Steam, you can sign in with Apple, you can sign in with Gmail, you can sign in with a regular email. Of course, if you're in the Web3 space, we want to make sure we're supporting MetaMask and everything else that Wallet Connect supports. Silent transaction signing, completely gasless. So again, you don't even have to know that it's on chain unless that's something you want to dive into. To Ryan's earlier point, and I think this is something me and Bennett have talked about quite a bit as well, is this philosophy of growing the pie rather than trying to slice it up further, right? And coming again from Mantle, we spent a lot of money on marketing. That wasn't my department, but we did conferences and all these sort of things. I don't think it was a net positive in the sense of that it never grew the size of Web3. We took customers from Optimism, Arbitrum, Ethereum, all the other L2s and chains, and moved that TVL over to Mantle. But how many people did we bring into blockchain? I think the answer would probably be pretty close to zero. And so we want to move out of that bubble and into shifting to sort of the next phase, which is growing the pie.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to unravel there. I think for anyone listening, there was a lot of juicy stuff that maybe got missed along the way, and so that's where we're going to help try to really tackle each point, because I'm really excited based on what you guys are talking about right now. One thing that I do want to talk about and emphasize a little bit is about how you guys actually interact with the games that are building on Uprising. From what I heard, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, and this is one of the things that we've heard with other chains, like, hey, the way that games work with chains is like, the gas fees are going to be there, and we'll give you guys a grant. And for that grant, we expect you guys to hit certain numbers of transactions, because like you said, a lot of times those chains will put a percentage extra onto those transactions so they can go ahead and make some money themselves, therefore paying back their grants and things like that. But from the sounds of it, you guys aren't doing that. Instead, maybe are you guys having a stake on the specific games itself, ensuring that, hey, if they're succeeding, then we reap the benefits of their success in a different way?
That is exactly what we're doing. We actually do no grants at all. We have no grants. We do investments, or we do, we will say publishing. We're kind of an L2 that has a publishing arm, or we're actually a publisher with an L2 made a Web3 publisher. Look at that. We believe that we have, Eric, you can cut in here as well if you want to, but one of the core philosophies is we believe there's actually multiple staple marks to this process. So we need Web3 games. We also do want to target Web 2 games that we believe have opportunity for Web 3, and that's not just bolting in something. It's like games that we can actually do, really get meatiness into that and bring users from that experience who want to come over. We don't want to force anyone over. We want to incentivize these Web 2 users with our awesome offerings in Web 3 to come do that. So that may be through like a clan game, a guild mode where there's like clan battles, and we incentivize users to join, working with existing Web3 clans to kind of establish clans and let Web2 users experience that and come into that place. Could be an example of how we do that. But we also do, publishing with user acquisition. We also offer like publishing services such as here's, for example, June, an amazing monetization expert, will help you come in and actually build a play that makes sense in the Web3 ecosystem. So that's just some of the things that we're looking at doing. But like those are kind of the way that we're approaching it. The idea of the Web 2 publishing services, we're doing those same things in Web 3. And so Eric and I had a lot of conversations early about, well, what is that mix in the space of that? And we are Eric, I'll let you talk about the Latin play if you want to.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll go back to the fundamentals for just a moment. So me and Ryan have been at this for a couple of years. This is our first year here in Uprising, but we were God working together. We've been working together on different things. And one of the very early conversations we had, and I think it's more apparent now than it was a couple of years ago, is are we trying to get Web3 developers to make good games? So we have Web3 games. Or are we trying to get traditional game developers to add Web3 to it? Like which is the way we're going here? And these are conversations we had very early on. And we saw teams like Axis have a lot of success, and they're, I would say, more Web3 native guys who brought gaming into it versus the other way around. But as we push into, I would say, higher quality games with more longevity, more meatiness, we need to bring in more traditional game developers, because making a game takes, anywhere from 5 to a few hundred people. Adding Web3 elements only takes a very small percentage of it. A critical part of it, but we can get into Web3 in 6 months or a year. You cannot become a good game developer in 6 months to a year. So the time commitment is different. So a lot of what we're really doing is bringing Web2 to Web3 versus trying to force Web3 onto Web2. So we are launching with about 5 titles. Each team is, whether they're on time and they finish building everything, we'll see how it goes. But essentially, all of the teams, 4 of the 5 teams are Web2 native guys, where they've built multiple titles. They're excellent game developers. And what we've done is stepped in and say, and they're all familiar with Web3 in that sense, but we've stepped in and say, hey, look, let us help you with the token economics. Let us help you with the NFTs. Let us help you figure out this piece so that we can do it right. And that's really where our team's experience comes in with. Some of them need a ton of help. Some of them need like just the tiniest little nudge. So it really depends. But really everyone who's coming in is, again, we're working very closely with them to just make sure that we feel like they're launching a good product and they feel supported, right? So I won't name other
and real
chains, but there's other chains that are like, oh, we launched 100 games this year. It's like, congratulations. 1 or 2 of those are actually successful titles, and the other 99% are sitting on grants that they can never collect because they will never hit the numbers necessary to collect those grants. We just don't want that position. So
it honestly feels it feels unethical, because you're just getting the marketing beat of announcing this title, but you're actually not benefiting the developer at all. It's easy to offer you a grant. Here's a $2 million grant. You have to hit these markers to hit it. I'm going to pay you out $50,000. It's like that just doesn't
predatory.
feel.
Yeah, it's very predatory. Yeah, and that's not where we want to be. So,
is that so? Yeah. Maybe as someone who isn't seeing that on my experience is obviously going to be different than the experience of people who are building something like you guys are building. Is that the standard?
I would say,
not saying, hey, can you tell me which chains are predatory? Not trying to throw you guys under the bus. But is that the standard right now in Web3 gaming?
The more games that you're pumping out, the more pressure you have to close as many. So we won't name chains, but the more that you have, the more difficult it is to sustain that. And I would say, from what we've seen, chains that are gaming focused and push less titles typically have higher quality titles. So I think Axis is a good example. I think Gala is a good example. Whatever happened internally, I don't know. I don't want to comment. But the quality of the games and the people at the time were fairly high, right? And I think we've seen this with other projects as well, where the more high touch the chains are typically and the less titles, the better the quality. And for us, we feel like that's the winning move at the moment versus saying, hey, we've signed 100 titles in the last year. This is how we're going to make it. We just don't think that's the case.
Well, the other thing too is, like, when we invest in a title, a grant's not an investment, and if you honestly aren't going to pay it out, if they hit it, it reminds me of when I was in the music industry. Labels would come in and they'd offer you a deal, right? We're going to do here's a 5 album deal, all right? We're going to front you this money, but you're going to pay us that money back. We'll keep fronting you this stuff. But then you can never get out of that deal. And so what ends up happening is you're kind of drowning in, so much sold the company store kind of philosophy.
Right.
It's like that, but in the sense of, it's if you go do all the work. So as a band, if I hit it and they don't promote me, but I hit it and I crush it, they're happy. Then they'll start promoting me, right? But if I don't hit it, I'm stuck. And it's kind of the same approach of that. And so when you're invested, whether that's as a marketing UA spend, that's a spend you're putting out immediately. If you're investing into the product, you're putting money into that product. You're now partnering with them at a different level than a grant. And so I think we want our developers to feel the security of that. We want our users on Uprising to know that when we're signing a product, we're really committing to that product. So it's not to a lot of people a major shift, but it's a pretty core philosophy difference about how we interact with the developers. Cesar, you asked that question earlier. Yeah, I think how we interact with developers is different.
I do want to just emphasize this point once again, because maybe as a listener, maybe they're not understanding the importance of this, but I think that this is like the first piece of why Uprising is different fundamentally to other chains. I think when you hear like, hey, we want our games to succeed, that's what every chain will say. But you guys literally need your games to be hits and be actually successful in order for you guys to stay running as a business. Because if they don't, you guys aren't bringing in that revenue that would otherwise keep you guys open, because you guys aren't getting those transaction fees like other chains might. And so when I think of like, okay, the games that you guys are going to be choosing to build on Uprising, well, these have to be thoroughly vetted, and you guys have to believe that these have the chance to not only be successful in Web3, but also bring in those Web2 players to enjoy the space. And to me, this seems like one of the more pure approaches to actually expand into the Web2 audience, because without it, it sounds like you guys may not succeed if you guys aren't able to get that Web2 audience in, which makes me super excited, because that means that every game that you guys are putting out, you guys honestly do believe that it can be a hit game that millions of people can enjoy.
Yeah, one of the core philosophies we actually have is the number one thing is the game fun? Like there may be issues with the game, but like if the game loop is fun, and we'll use Maelstrom as an example of that. Maelstrom has some issues. We're in the process of working with Forthright Entertainment. I'm in both doors there, but of getting that product and fixing it and doing things to it from the user experience, user journey perspective. But at the end of the day, people are having a blast with the game. The game itself is fun. You can make games look good. You can make games be marketed. What you can't do is make a game fun. If a game's not fun, you can't color that up enough, right? I mean, it's just, and so a game may not look great, but I'll use the example of Lethal Company. Lethal Company looks awful. It's very stylized, but it's not a good looking game. It's a blast, and because the game loop is fun, and that's kind of one of our core philosophies. What we look for at titles are they fun? It's one of the very first thing we look at when we're looking for a game.
How else? I mean, on that, I think while we're on this point, I am curious, because if so much of Uprising's like vision and core focus hinges on kind of what you said, Eric, earlier on the success of picking winners, which is what Ryan's whole career has been. How do you guys pick those winners? What beyond, hey, this is fun, how do you determine what a winner is going to be in a Web3 gaming
I
space?
pick winners because I had some failures along the way. For the record, I don't. You learn through experience, right? And so, I'll go into a little bit of our philosophy. So we want to get new titles, we want to get existing titles, and we want to get titles that maybe are early access but need some help too. So we're kind of looking across the spectrum here of diversifying what we're looking for.
Do not discriminate.
We do not discriminate. We do discriminate on if it's not fun, but
Yeah.
so I have a really big philosophy around community acquisition through game acquisition. And Maelstrom is an example of this. There's other games that we're looking at. There are games that have, for a multitude of reasons, not succeeded, or they're on life support. And oftentimes what we see is if it's a good game, maybe it's like on Steam, really well rated, but it's just the community is not engaged. We go in and we look at these titles and we assess them and say, okay, number one, is it a fit? Is there a Web3 opportunity inside the product? First of all, is it fun? Is there a Web3 opportunity? Because there are some games that there's not a Web3 opportunity and it won't work, right? You're not just taking anything. So we tend to lean towards products that were premium, that we think could go to free to play with a monetization model working Web3. They could already be a free game that needs help in bringing new life into the product. Some games that are out there are very successful or were successful. The studios behind them had 100 people inside of them, right? And so they hit a point where they can't sustain the studio. They need to move to the next project. But a smaller team could totally make that a live ops and make that profitable, right? And so we see some things like that. So there's a lot of approaches on how we look at these titles and pick them. But I think at the core end of the day is we want to find a variety of products across a variety of genres that make sense into the space. So we're targeting more mid-core to hardcore gamers, RPGs, FPSs, battle royales, RPG. Like I said, maybe even some MMO stuff eventually, not out of the gate, but some hardcore strategy products, things that
That's
are
what we call it.
meaty, right? We also have an 80-20 philosophy, 20% other. So it could be a casual game. It could not even be a game at all. It could be something different. But 80% of what we're targeting is a mid-core to hardcore game. And that's really what we're looking at right now. We believe that's how you bring in those communities. If you revive a product for a community that has 1 million, 2 million players, you're going to bring in some users into that philosophy. One of the things we've run into is that the Web 2 users tend to have a really negative view of Web 3 or crypto. And a lot of that's fair. A lot of that is they look at all the negative, stuff because what I don't see often is the success stories of people doing it right. Right. The media loves to cover the failures, just like in everything. That negativity sells. And so those are some of the challenges that we run into with players and with developers. That we are, our philosophy, I think, kind of mitigates that risk for a lot of them. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of our starting point for that.
If I can tack on there too, really the products and the teams that we're working with are fairly far along in the development process. Generally speaking, At this point in time, we are not working with games that have not been under development at all. And they're like, this is our concept. Let's fund it. Let's raise tokens. Let's do this for 2 years and then release a product. We are not going to attach our name to it at this point. Never say never in the future, but our core philosophy here as well is that again, without naming names, we don't want to work with a project that raises on tokens for 2 years, has a good run on the tokens, now is vesting themselves. They've hit the cliff, they're vesting themselves, they're putting their own tokens in their own pocket, but they've released no product. Now, suddenly they're not incentivized to, unless they have a smash hit. If they have a smash hit, it's going to be good for their token price. If not, the only thing it's going to do is push their token price down. So now they are incentivized not to release their title.
To not to release it.
They're going to do as much FOMO and hype as possible. They are getting tokens in their own pockets. The VCs are getting, we passed 1 year mark. And I think that's something that is a misaligned incentive in our space that we don't want to be involved in. So basically the titles that we're working with, again, to Ryan's point, are maybe already out and need a certain amount of work, or early access, or haven't been released, of course, but are far enough along that we're able to do like beta or play testing and say, hey, this is actually fun. So again, that's part of our core philosophy as a chain, is that we just do not want to be promoting titles that are not that far in development yet. So also quite I think a difference there from some other players in the space.
Another thing I'll touch on too is we recognize this problem. We're trying to create I'm probably putting it too far ahead, but we're not looking for bots. We're looking for real users, real players. One of the challenges of that is that to investors into the hype markets, that doesn't excite people, because when you look at actual real numbers, you may have a lower number than what is other groups have. But we don't look at,
I can call out a good example here. So we'll say, I mean, Axie's been pretty public about it. Like, we have 1 million active users is what Axie's is saying. So recently, Oasis worked with a title called Last Memories. They had 250,000 downloads of their title in a week, and it was the number 1 on the iOS store in Japan, which is the 3rd biggest gaming market in the world. So you compare those numbers, something doesn't add up there. And Axie's is already a lower number than what we see on some TON games, where they're like, oh, we have 40 million players. I think it's safe to assume, without inferring too much, that there are not 40 million players playing that TON game. But when it comes down to transaction fees, Caesar, as you mentioned earlier, that's how these chains are making money. So it doesn't matter if they're bots or not. As long as they're making transactions, people are willing to say, hey, that's great. For us, on the other hand, that there is no net benefit. We are aligned with the players totally, that those games need to be successful on the merit of the games, not on bots, in order for it to be sustainable, and therefore for us to be profitable as well. So we're more aligned on that side. And really, we don't, sometimes we Twitter it, but really our philosophy is like real games for real people. Really, that's what our goal is. So I think that value aligns us with the player a lot more.
Yeah, when you mention about games that are like, oh yeah, we're not going to have a fun game, so let's push things out and continue holding people onto hope. I'm waiting for
Those
a lot of games
pre-sales,
that were
too.
supposed to be out like 2 years ago, and they're still saying that they're in
They're never
development.
coming. They're never coming.
So I think I know what you mean there. But I think when it comes to the idea of mass adoption, because at the end of the day, that's the one thing that everyone in this space says, and like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, crypto gaming, or whatever we're going to call it in the future, is really going to be the one place where we can really show how crypto can be massively used by everyone. But in order for us to achieve that, I think it's a twofold problem. One, you need to have fun games, and two, you need to make it as easy as possible to onboard people into crypto without them even having to realize that they're utilizing a lot of the times. There's some chains that when I go in, I have to feel like I'm doing 12 different steps before I can even get into the login button. How are you guys tackling this onboarding issue to ensure that that doesn't happen with Uprising?
Like buying tokens, staking them, minting an NFT, using that NFT to play the game, and we're just like, we've lost people. And I think before I answer the question, the titles that we're launching, and again, 80-20 rule, we need to be able to do traditional user acquisition plays for them. We need to be able to do what Web2 games do to help acquire users. And whether that's paid advertising, through bringing on other distribution channels from Web2, these sort of things, the games have to be accessible, as you mentioned, to Web2 people for that to happen. Like, you just can't go out and buy ads for Axes and expect Web2 people to come on. And again, that's not a slight at Axes. They've been super successful and they've done lots of amazing things in the space. It's just hard to onboard Web2 people and therefore create sort of that idea of mass adoption. And I'm not sure people who don't work in the industry don't understand how much UA or user acquisition is a business in Web2, whether it's mobile, whether it's PC, all these things is very, very key. So yeah, to that end, of course, gasless, social sign-in wallets, which for people is just creating an account, and silent transactions on the back end, really. And then people get their NFTs or their tokens, for them, the tokens are just gold in the game or whatever it may be, hopefully at essentially that level. If people want to dive deeper and say, hey, I can collect rewards from a rewards platform, then they maybe push it further, or they say, look, I want to sell this NFT or trade it, then I think that's where we really start to get into what Web3 brings. And for me, I think the most exciting thing about Web3 as a game developer is this idea of open standards, that an NFT typically is an NFT across every single EVM chain. And we have this set standard that our industry has mostly adopted. And if you have an NFT, you could go to OpenSea, you could go to Magic Eden, you could go to Rarible, wherever you want, and trade it and sell it. And you're not locked into one specific standard around that. And so I think we, as an industry, are still like, oh, interoperability doesn't exist between games for NFTs and stuff like that. I think that was an early hype, and we may eventually get there for certain products. But the fact that we can just buy, sell, trade, rent, leverage, gamble with whatever our items is already a massive interoperability win that did not exist. And if you're an indie game developer and you want to create a store in your game for multiplayer, for trading and selling, you know how much of a lift that is? But being able to just add as an NFT and not have to do that if you're like a 5 developer person team is massive. So again, I think that's sort of the gateway, is where we just make it easy to come on board. If you don't want to do those things, you don't have to. But there are all these other
no one will ever have to buy. No one will ever have to buy an NFT to play a game on Uprising, right? Like, it honestly, it's such a backwards philosophy. Why would you not want to make it simple to get people in the door, right? Like, hey, come check out the game. And again, if the game's fun, what's going to happen is you're going to have a natural gravitation.
Free to play has been massively successful for a reason. So we're not here to reinvent the wheel in a lot of cases.
Is every game going to be free to play for you guys, or they're just going to be easier like Web2 access points?
The answer is we're leaning towards free to play. Again, we don't have.
We can't predict the future, but for now, every title we're launching is free to play.
We don't have a premium title
with our free to play.
Yeah. In fact, one is converting from premium to free to play. So, and we're helping with that process. So again, back to the publisher dynamic, we're coming in and our publishing services we're bringing in our game design and our tokenomics guy to help with those pieces. But but yeah, I mean, it's right now the answer is we're currently focusing on free to play products. I think there will probably be at some point a time where we do find a premium product. Part of it's about finding the devs you want to work with too. It's not just finding good games; it's also liking the teams that you're working with. Because we're partnering with them. We're not just saying here's a little carrot of grant
Right.
money. You know.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting too is
The code base
not doing
quality.
grants has it's actually vetted a lot of people out. I feel like it's flushed out a lot of bad actors who just want free money, and that's been something that's been really nice. Do you guys do grants? No. Okay. All right. Well,
But
we do investments,
I mean,
but all right.
but we do free wallets for you guys, which normally cost money. We pay for all your gas. We can drive UA. We can bring you users. We can bring you exposure.
Yeah.
And we're going to do this over only a certain amount of titles. So you're going to get that attention from the ecosystem. But they're like, no grants.
Right. So it's not like you guys aren't throwing money at games that want to build with you. It's just that you're not throwing free money for doing nothing.
It's essentially how we're doing it. Really,
We're throwing smart money. We're not throwing dumb money. We're throwing smart money. We're like user acquisition money is good money. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, it is like if I say here's money, go do something with that. Versus, I mean, most game developers need exposure, right? Steam is chumping out 80 titles a day. I mean, even like follow up titles like Beholder 2, like games that had big first hits, they're just not hitting the same numbers because there's so much product out there.
Right.
Most of it's garbage. It's so hard to cut through the noise, and so I think that's one of the big incentivizations for game developers is, hey, we're going to bring a new layer of users. We're going to bring new user acquisition pipeline for you guys, and that's been so. Some of the developers that have been in the Web 2 coming to Web 3 spaces view this as a new user base for your player base, and that's been like oh, okay, I get that. Like, well, I thought I have to have crypto. I have to use tokens. You don't have to. Here's other solutions that we also provide in blockchain. Because I think that's the thing too is blockchain technology is pretty a deep tech stack, and there's a lot of to the point of the store that there's a lot of features that I think a lot of developers don't understand are there. They just think NFTs. They just think crypto. There's a whole lot of other technology behind that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, when it comes to the actual games itself, I know Uprising is going to, bring in a lot of different games. Will you guys try to harbor an ecosystem around the games that you guys are bringing on so players find it easy to go from one game to another, knowing that, hey, this is still the Uprising quality or level of quality that they can expect from an Uprising title? How are you guys going to harbor that if, the Web3 elements aren't so apparent for people there?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll jump on that one. So I think one of the things that we've seen coming into Web3 is we often throw the fundamentals out the door. We have a ton of marketing experience. I don't mean us personally necessarily, but the world does in what works and what doesn't work and these sort of things. And the funniest thing that I found coming into the space is we know that it's always cheaper to keep a user re-engaged than it is to find new users into a game or ecosystem, right? And I think in the past, we didn't see a lot of this in Web3, where just because you play one title on, say, Arbitrum, just randomly, for example, doesn't mean you necessarily play a second title on it. And there was no sort of connecting factor between those games necessarily. And for us, that was a really big thing coming in. It's like, oh, how do we retain users in the ecosystem versus having to constantly go out and get new users every time, which is an expensive process, which therefore then we spend more money on marketing than we do on the actual game. And that takes away from what we really want to do is make fun games. So to that layer, we do have a rewards requesting platform. I don't think it's really quite the right term for it. That actually sits at the protocol level. And I think we're the first chain, I believe, that's doing that. So obviously there are other questing platforms. They don't typically have their own chains and they don't do it at the protocol level. Everyone who launches with us, because we are permissioned, we basically say, hey, look, we'd like you to throw in this SDK into your game. We're going to track progress within the game, and people are going to be rewarded for that, for the actual progress in the game. So not only off-chain, off-chain, on-chain, as well as in socials. And how we're looking to do that is a little bit different in the sense of that we want to do essentially proof of participation. So I think we've seen a lot of things where people have done proof of play. I think value from our community is not only through play. I think there's a lot of different things people can do to bring value to the chain, and therefore we want to give it back to them. I think we've seen other ones where it's skill based, where they're just like, oh, you have to be a top player. I don't think everyone in the world is always going to be a top player, and it's not only those people who bring value to us. And so really that reward layer, protocol layer on Uprising is about bringing value back to the players who support us in what we're doing, because it comes back to that idea, like without them, there is nothing essentially. So we want to make sure that we are always rewarding people for that participation and the value that they bring in that sense. So we need that sort of reciprocal relationship, and therefore, protocol level rewards essentially. So we think
and that's why you brought Kearney on as the intern.
Honestly,
Community is everything.
As the intern. No, it is.
Yeah, honestly,
you're the magician.
That's been a huge part of that. And we're about to kick off our season 0. We're working with a company called Snag Solutions. So they do rewards for Pudgies and a bunch of others. And so we've been building out a custom solution together with them. And so, me and Kearney and Ryan were on a call with them yesterday, discussing it the day before, and so on and so forth. So and then what was our number one rule? And we were like, was to make sure that we always give value back to the community before anyone else. So that was like the number one rule that we set up as we figure out what our platform looks like, that everything we do has to hit that mark.
And I think something important that we'll just throw in with that kind of rewards platform is supporting the creators that do want to create high quality, high level content. And we'll have Uprising creators with us that we will be supporting through. Currently it's just EngageBot, but we will make it a staple in our rewards platform in the future. And as we grow, they will grow with us, and I think that's really important to our team.
Yeah, proof of participation.
I like that. I have a one-off question that's a little bit more out there, and this is the idea of at the end of the day, we still are in crypto. Like Matthew said, we come from DeFi. We're a little bit degenerates ourselves. We do look for those speculative plays. We want to go ahead and we have those 100Xs, right? Does that get taken away from Uprising? Will that still be something that's part of the ecosystem? Will people be able to come in and buy some NFTs, buy some tokens or things like that can have some potential to grow later on?
We got you, fam.
What does that look like in Uprising?
So, we are actually the first multi-chain native yield blockchain, and sometimes that piece gets pushed to the side. And so basically when we're talking about native yield, I always ask people, are you familiar with Blast? And then some people cringe, some people were like, yeah, sort of. Obviously we won't get into that, but one of the cool things that they did do was this concept of native yield, where you could take your ETH and you could stick it into Lido, and you'll get your APY from Lido, and they'll give you something called SETH, which is essentially a receipt token. And they say, okay, this is liquid staking. You're liquid now. The problem with SETH in general is you can't pay gas with it. You can't play video games with it. You can't buy NFTs with it. You can put it into some DeFi protocol. So it's not that liquid, really, from that actual sense. So what Blast is like, hey, look, bridge over your ETH to our L2. We're going to sprinkle some magic internet points, blockchain points on top of that. But you will get the APY, and we will mint you a wrapped Ethereum token on the L2, and now you're 100% liquid. And we thought, like, hey, that's really cool. That was one of the coolest things they did, because now people can get the APY and do whatever they want. Now, with Oasis, we don't have Rocket Pool or Lido. Our validators are run by Sega and Ubisoft and Bandai Namco and Square Enix. They each run their own validator. Those are who secure our network. So you got to trust those guys to secure your money or your games. That's who's doing it. And those validators return a 9% APY. So almost 3 times what Lido is offering at the moment. So much, much higher. So if you're on the DGen side, hey, that's cool, 9%. The problem with that is for us, and it's changing, is the L1's market cap is about $500 million. So if we compare that to Solana or Ethereum, it's much, much smaller, right? So they're growing, but we want to be able to degen into that further. So we said, hey, why don't we support native yield for other chains? And we really can. And so I will give an example. So say it was Solana, we could deploy contracts onto Solana. You could lock up your Sol on the Solana contract. It would be validated into the Coinbase Cloud Validator. And we have an agreement with the bridge. I won't name them yet, but we message pass over to the L2. We don't want to lock up anything into, Ronin's had 2 unfortunate hacks on their bridges. We don't want to be in that situation. So we're message passing. And we mint you a wrapped Solana token on the L2. We're gasless, so you can use it right away. We're working with getting closer to deploying AA wallets. So essentially what happens under the hood is if you want to buy an NFT with wrapped Solana, it hits a DEX, does a swap, and pays for it in the appropriate token. And now you get your NFT. So really we want this idea of pay for anything with any major supported token, where people could come in from Solana or Ethereum or other chains and be able to play games and collect their APY. And so now we have this interesting effect where with our DEXs, you'll be able to trade a yield-bearing Solana with a yield-bearing Oasis with a yield-bearing Ethereum token. And we have not seen that happen anywhere else, where essentially you are holding these tokens that are yield-bearing, and you're still 100% liquid to trade with them. So we
And that's all without bridging? Is that what you said? That's all without bridging?
It is bridging, but we're using message passing bridging. So nothing's locked on the bridge to be hacked, basically. It's one of the major benefits of message passing bridges. You could intercept one message, and that would be bad, but that's far different than having hundreds of thousands of dollars being hacked in a sort of a lock and mint style bridge. But yeah, so if you're a DGen and you want to come in that side, we'll be running campaigns around it. We'll get into that deeper, that you can basically stake in those tokens, bridge them over, get extra rewards on top of it, and then collect that APY on top of it. So we have just had an amazing response from our partners around that, because who does not want more utility to their token being staked? Like, everyone's like, oh, for sure.
What I'm hearing is that we are like standing on the tip of the iceberg, even an hour into this conversation, that there is a lot that you guys are building.
There's more. Yeah, for sure.
I think you have a fascinating take. I mean, essentially you guys have taken a lot of what we've seen the rest of this world that we're all diving into and trying to explore, create. And you've said, okay, yeah, we can actually take a ecosystem and a platform that does work for games beneficially, and that does work for gamers, both Web 2 and Web 3, and that does work for degens like myself, who, I happen to be a gamer and a degen. That's not always the same thing. I think that my right half hates my left half all the time. And I'm one of the 4 people that's like on the fence, liking both worlds. And so it's cool that you guys are finding a way to actually craft and cultivate that. Man, I think I'm excited about this. If
you put, say you put $1,000 into Steam, right, in your Steam wallet, and you got points. Steam is making money off of holding that money for you. Now, if you put $1,000 into Uprising and you held it in Oasis tokens, you're making 9%. You're making money off of holding money in your gaming wallet. Like, that's what we want to see happen. So sorry to interrupt you, but why should we? Why should all those companies?
Well, I mean,
why should they? It's almost like off of you for holding your money for you. Now you're making money.
It's funny that Caesar mentioned like, or do you guys have something for the degens? And even that is like, that's better yield. If you want to talk about yield, I don't know how you guys can't get into that too much, but that's essentially better yield than a lot of these degen opportunities are, while being something that's a little bit safer, being something that's a little bit less degen. It's play to earn in an aspect, but it's through the chain itself. Really cool. Man, I could swim in this ocean that you guys are creating for a long time. But I know Ryan has a hard stop. We got to get wrapping. If people want to get involved with the ecosystem right now, if I'm like looking for, okay, dude, I just listened to this conversation. Where is the first stop? Where do I get off the boat? Where do they go? What is the first thing they should do to get exposure to Uprising?
Bernie, why don't you take that one?
I got it. Hop in our Discord, discord.gg/Uprising Labs, or on our X handle, uprising_L2. We have an extensive FAQ. We have a white paper on the way. We have blog posts on the way, and we have all of our updates in the announcements. So that's probably the way to go. And if you have any questions,
plug game
nights. Game nights, Maelstrom Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern. If you want to try out our new game, our new title. But yeah, we are here as a resource. I am here. My DMs are also open at Carney Crypto if you have any specific questions. So yeah, again, thank you, Matthew and Caesar. This was a
Hey guys, pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Legendary. Hey, this will not be the last time we have you guys in the podcast. I can feel that we still got stuff to explore. So this has been a blast. Thank
There's
you so
more.
much. Find their Discord. We'll put a link to their Discord wherever you're listening, right in the description right here. Go show some love. There's no way you should listen to this conversation and not go play something. Go play on a Tuesday night, have some fun, win a battle royale. One of the few battle royales that I'm hearing is actually fun in Web3 gaming. So that's a win already. Cool, guys. Thank you so much. And we will see you next time on 100X.